Hey everyone, I'm Alex.
And I'm Jack.
And today we're going to be ranking the bosses of Elden Ring Nightreign from easiest to hardest. This is an interesting game to rank because so much of your success depends on factors like having a full party of good players and a comprehensive understanding of how to optimize your time during the day. I originally wasn't even going to buy this game, but Jack was getting tortured by useless morons in solo queue, so I decided to step in to make beating the game a little more feasible for the Cytonox Collective. That brings us to the now, where we have labored to bring you all lists on both the quality and difficulty of these new bosses. We hope that besides being entertaining, it also contains some nuggets of good advice to help you claw your way through in your battle against the forces of the Night Lord. Before we get into the video, I of course want to thank our patrons for their generous support of the channel. With that said, here are the rankings, which lack a distinct Alex and Jack ranking this time because we 100% agreed on the list here, possibly a function of the co-op nature of the game. Enjoy!
Number 8, Maris, Fathom of Night. Off rip, you'll notice I played as Wilder for this fight, despite this being, in essence, the designated long-range build boss. I have a bad habit in games of finding something that works and sticking to it. I remain curious, but also comfortable in what works for me, and mained Wilder and Executor for most of the bosses. I did play every character in this game, and I loved Iron Eye and Raider, but I felt like, at least for this boss, it'd be interesting having it fight a two-front war. As it turns out, Maris is actually wholly incapable of handling both long and short-range builds at once, at least in our experience. Nightreign's bosses are extremely dependent on two variables. One, status effect. If you don't have a boss's specified ailment on at least 2 out of 3 players, more likely than not you're done for. And 2, knowledge, be it from research or dying to the inevitable undodgeable attack like we did in our first attempt. Maris, like practically every boss in this game, has one notably unique move that's extremely dangerous and requires an adequate response, or else death will ensue. To the average Souls player, when you see a boss enter a still state, your instinct will be to sprint away as far as possible, unless it's some asswipe like Lawrence or Smo, who get punished heavily by iframing their AoEs. Not like I'm saying Smo is an asswipe also, I just couldn't come up with an equally funny and apt term. Either way, Maris actually does not have an AoE, but an arena-wide sleep-inducing attack that's only stopped by a staggering ult such as Iron Eye or Wilder's, or a damage check. Almost every Nightreign boss has at least one damage check, putting a major precedent on killing as many camps and castles as possible, ideally with that boss's weakness as well. Maris happens to be weak to lightning, which is probably the second easiest status effect to find behind fire. Not only is Maris fairly grounded for a boss able to fly, when he focuses on a melee target, it essentially becomes a firing range for Iron Eye and Recluse builds. His most dangerous regular move is his spinning AoE, followed by the wave attacks, which make up just about 90% of what he'll do in any fight. He kind of moves like how Marlon Brando acted at the end of his career, like he's reading a script held up by some lackey to. Okay, now float there and do nothing. Okay, now move over there and do nothing. And scene. I would give Maris credit for being an endurance test, but any Night Lord is going to be long as shit. We beat him without even really hitting our flow state for this game, and with pretty mediocre levels and weapons, all in about 6 minutes give or take. His heavier moves like the Al-Qaeda homing missile jellyfish that he quite literally poops out, or the nuke, lest I forget, can be treacherous, but the first is avoided by just running in any direction, and the other can be taken care of by an Iron Eye as fast as I can say this thing looks like the Elden beast but bluer. I actually want to take a moment and recognize the danger of the nuke though. That thing has the ability to easily one-shot and actually would have killed us in our winning attempt had Wilder's Sixth Sense not activated. That shit was crazy. I gave up and started crashing out until all of a sudden Maris was aggroed on me and I entered back into my zone and clutched up. Anyways, though he does his best River Twigs impression in Phase 2 and utilizes his cue ball jellyfish a lot more, Maris, Fathom of Night is an easily learnable and fairly repetitive boss that, compared to the ridiculous bar of difficulty of Nightreign's major foes, is a shoo-in for easiest in the game.
Number 7, Caligo, Miasma of the Night. Historically speaking, FromSoft dragons are things to be dreaded and feared. Whether that is due to their awe-inspiring mastery of the elements or abominable jank varies per dragon, but by and large they're tougher than the average foe. That trend is completely bucked by Caligo, who shatters the mold by being neither difficult nor janky. I wouldn't go so far as to call him easy, but we beat him on our first try with a random guy in our party without ever feeling like we were knocking on death's door. It is worth noting that for a guy simply named Player, this random gentleman was shockingly good and may have played a role in our lack of friction against the dragon. Either way, Caligo doesn't come out swinging the way some other bosses do. He loves to breathe icy fog at people who don't exist while your party pickles his foul feet with fire weapons. He is utterly helpless against this when the fight begins, and it's tantamount to animal abuse. Only when he blankets the arena in fog does the fight begin to kick up a notch. For us, this preceded an enormous arena-wide AoE ice attack that none of us were able to dodge by running away. It seems to be a running trend in this game for bosses to charge up attacks that look ominous as fuck, but are only preventable by staggering them out of it rather than putting distance between him and you. This is very contrary to my soul's instincts and makes a lot of Nightreign bosses hard to sight read, but it's at least a sort of fool me once situation where it won't be an issue in future runs. After this happens, he gains a moveset with a lot more options for dealing with ankle biters, and the fight starts to demand that you actually monitor what he's doing and stay ready to run or roll away. If you don't have the mountaintop Shifting Earth in play, which realistically nobody will have because Shifting Earths have a 1 in a quadrillion chance of proccing after their initial appearance, Frostbite is on your list of worries. It's not as terrifying as statuses like Madness, but it's worth avoiding when possible. This, by the way, is an ankle dragon, which is to say you want to hang out by his feet rather than his head like you do with Midir or Bale. It's not suicide to attack his head, but I found myself whiffing more often than not when I went for jump attacks. The common theme in his attacks, to me, is that they are all well telegraphed and not particularly demanding to dodge, but they'll whittle you down over time if you carelessly ignore things like Frostbite or get greedy nipping at his ankles. It's about spacing, which I mostly consider easier than bosses that are timing intensive like some above Caligo on our list. Caligo isn't a fraud, but he's certainly no match for the prowess of Lil Durtop and Big Nut Swing.
Number 6, Fulgor, Champion of Night. This boss just felt the most familiar of any. He never goes wizard style and unleashes some super ass fuck combo that one-shots you, or even does anything crazy at all, truthfully. This took me right back to fighting some of the toughest Souls 3 bosses, and I loved the experience. But in terms of his challenge, Fulgor is no pushover, he just suffered from the fact that we were good as hell. He was unaware that he was engaging in combat with Lil Durtop. Fulgor is probably my favorite timing of the bosses because of how similar he feels to the more vintage but fast-paced Souls bosses. Mostly in the age-old punishing of greed, which nearly 10 years into playing Souls games, I still am not great at. Like Maris, Fulgor is also weak to lightning, but in this fight, the weakness is much more evident in its use beyond damage. Fulgor can be staggered out of certain attacks, such as his Holy Slam with lightning buildup, and this becomes super helpful in Phase 2, where his second arm grows back in what's probably the least surprising reveal of all time. The second I saw this dude had one arm, it was so obvious he was going to pull that out. His second phase leads to a significant increase in difficulty, with his arm following up every attack with a highly volatile ooze, as well as the Fisher move's increased quantity of spears and what have you. Fulgor is a fairly regular boss, all things considered, and is the perfect level of difficulty in our eyes. Unfortunately, that means he's piss easy for Nightreign standards.
Number 5, Gladius, Beast of Night. For a first boss, Cerberus here is an absolute ass fucker. We fought him before FromSoft nerfed all the bosses by giving them health pools that took less than 20 years to whittle down, so it was more of an endurance fight than we expected going into it. We ended up refighting him after beating the game to see if our experience was due to being new to Nightreign, and while I can say we were definitely better the second time around, he's still no joke. While a lot of the bosses are susceptible to the strategy of having one talented dodger hold aggro while the other two guys run a train from behind, Gladius is pretty apt at preventing this for 3 reasons. 1, he's just flat out large and hard to flank. It takes a considerable amount of time to get around him, to the point of being almost pointless to attempt it. Secondly, he runs around an awful lot. He's the most mobile boss in the game besides probably Adele, so it's rare that you can keep him in one place long enough to mount an overwhelming offensive. Lastly, he has a lot of attacks that can hit you regardless of your direction relative to him owing to the chainsword on his back. It's not super hard to dodge, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't catch me every once in a while. And that's part of what makes the bosses in this game hard, the lack of practice opportunities. With normal Elden Ring, or any of the other FromSoft Souls games for that matter, you can throw yourself at a boss time and time again and learn their attacks until dodging most of them is easily replicable and second nature. Here, you need to make it through a 40-minute preliminary segment just to take a single stab at them. With this model, it's much easier to make mistakes and get blindsided by mechanics or attacks you don't quite have down. Gladius splits into 3 individual wolves in his second phase, which you'd think means each player has to 1v1 their own dog. Not necessarily the case though. A lot of the time, only one dog will strongly pursue your party, while the other 2 remain on a sort of standby until they're attacked. It's still definitely harder than Phase 1 because they can gang up on you and lunge from off screen, but if you have a holy weapon, you can seal them back into their original form within 30 seconds or so. It's another case of a boss being dramatically easier if you come prepared with its weakness element, so definitely load up on holy. Gladius is a substantial roadblock for new players, and it's not so surprising to me that a lot of people are still hard stuck at him. It just amazes me how many people manage to take Gladius down and still suck balls at the game in every way. Thank God they locked the final boss behind a second requirement.
Number 4, Noster, Wisdom of Night. Though this has nothing to do with this boss's difficulty, we just thought this was the funniest one by a mile. It's literally a bug, and the Night Lord decided it'd be the wisdom of all the Night Lords. How fucking stupid is that? Noster happens to be one of a few Night Lords weak to fire, and my Wilder just so happened to be as close to a pyromancy build as I could have made, which turned out pretty nice here. The fight begins as a fairly tame gank, with a Moonlight Butterfly-esque magic moth floating around, and a giant Adele-like beetle lurking in the dunes of the arena. The beetle can be fairly difficult to read, dealing heavy damage with minimal tells, most especially the Stomp and Scream, which is what actually killed us during our first attempt. The moth is almost like a free hitbox during the first phase, however, doing easy to dodge but high damage homing soul masses and otherwise just kind of floating around, again often at very hittable heights for melee characters, strangely and not very wisely. With the beginning of phase 2, the bugs merge. And it gets easier, so long as you're attentive. The arena becomes an Eastern European war zone, with the moth emitting constant comets of Azure, and the two combining for a terrifying stampede attack that can easily one-shot. What makes this boss so difficult is its one-shot threat, basically the Alex Pereira of Night Lords. You'll probably get comfortable standing by the beetle's asshole, or I guess where it would be, and pay minimal attention as you chop away at it. And that's how they catch you, whipping out a scream or a soul stream from the heavens and nuking your health bar with one attack. I would label this as a glass cannon, but because the fire weakness does basically nothing at all besides causing the beetle to shell up in phase 1 Wukong style, it's just more like a cannon. Noster is an entertaining boss that's so entertaining it sometimes takes advantage of your dopamine overdose and kills you in one attack for it. That is actually pretty wise.
Number 3, Adele, Baron of Night. Like Gladius, Adele is dangerous primarily because of how spazzy he is. You have two major openings to deal unobstructed damage to him. When he's eating somebody or when he's vomiting up poison you pumped into him to exploit his weakness. If you don't have any poison, this fight gets significantly more challenging because you're restricted to sneaking hits in at irregular intervals or sacrificing damage to create an opening. His moveset sees him hurtling all over the arena, and his large size prevents you from circling around back to hit him without fear of being devoured. The amount of running you need to do to keep up with him means your stamina bar is usually low whenever you're near him, which limits both your offensive and defensive capabilities. He's not very tanky to make up for this, but it still means that you have to pay more attention to the stamina bar than you do for most bosses. His damage is rather high, with command grabs and bleed on the menu if he manages to chow down on you at any point. Unless you're high level or brought a Crimson Flask that auto heals you at low HP, this move is usually fatal. I've seen a lot of runs go to hell after everybody takes one too many turns in the Gaping Jaw and the revive times start getting brutally long. Some of his attacks aren't too tough, especially if you know how to jump over the Quake moves, but the issue of not being able to hit him easily can turn this into a punishing endurance fight that slowly wears down your party and ends with him at low HP and you at 0 HP. This is not to speak of his buffed form that just came out yet either, which seems significantly tougher in its own right, but we haven't tested that out yet.
Number 2, Hailstor, the Night Lord. The final boss gave us a real run for our money, and I gotta say the difficulty of this was very fitting after the steep decline in Foghorn Caligo, in our experiences anyways. Hailstor begins as a lowly wretch with about 9 tiny arms, all with their own sword that deal a fuck ton of damage apparently. This is the only fight in the game with 2 health bars, but this first phase isn't much of a boss in truth. It's more of a gotcha for the apocalyptic second phase. Again, like Foghorn, pretty obvious, but still cool I guess. Though this definitely should have had a cutscene instead of a loading screen. Major miss on the devs part. The first phase moves very ghastly, kind of like Midra, and is really hard to tell. He'll go from fent leaning to whipping out a 7-hit combo at the pace of Malekith, which I admittedly never got great at avoiding. After phase 1's measly health bar empties, phase 2 boots up and you'll immediately recognize the presence of a certain Moonlight Greatsword. This thing is insane in this game. Ludwig's was wild, but this takes the cake. Hailstor's biggest threat is his ability to switch targets mid-combo, as well as his wide range of striking, with most of his attacks going in a minimum 270-degree radius. You'll probably have gotten used to taking advantage of boss aggros by chilling near their ass, but Hailstor puts a hard reset on that otherwise impeccable strat. Moreover, not only is he an incredibly powerful melee challenge, he rips open the night sky, unleashing maelstroms of fire, poison, and other various statuses. The fissures are what make this phase so fucking ridiculously hard. They aren't just everywhere, they're all the time and come in 3 to 4 different variations, forcing you to have to pay almost more attention to the floor than the boss himself, who, by the way, is no pushover. The fact that Hailstorm can be reasonably muttered in the same breath as our number 1 fight difficulty-wise is a testament to the challenge he presents. I can even see the argument that this is harder. It definitely feels more overwhelming and chaotic. Either way, Hailstorm proves he deserves the title of being the Night Lord, ending up not only the second hardest boss in the hardest Souls game to date, but possibly the second hardest boss in the entire series.
Number 1, Libra, Creature of the Night. I feel like Libra is quickly shaping up to be the community consensus hardest boss, and for once we're with the majority on something. He is an absolute fenthead boss, capable of cramming the arena full of floor sigils and turrets until every single atom of physical space surrounding him is chock full of madness-inducing tools of slaughter. There are a lot of things that make him challenging, but the most obvious elephant in the room is his ability to raise your madness meter. If it's ever filled, you become paralyzed for multiple seconds and take massive damage, often outright killing you. This can be negated somewhat by picking up the nuggets of fool's gold he leaves behind after certain moves, but without some madness-reducing items or high status resistance, it's a serious threat that can turn an otherwise promising run into a suicide charge in the blink of an eye. Another challenging mechanic is his buff state, which he enters if you fail to destroy the golden sigils spawned by his meditation. It's easy to cancel the first time by simply running into them, as there are only 4, but subsequent attempts to use this move will see him placing upwards of 8, oftentimes with 2 or more in the air beyond the reach of any melee characters. Without a ranged character who understands the fight, this usually renders attempts to prevent his buffed state hopeless without use of an ultimate move or a character art. These moves recharge rather slowly, especially against bosses who you don't get to hit very often. Libra may be the least mobile boss in the game, but his alchemy circles of doom will absolutely ruin you if you carelessly lock yourself in lengthy animations like greatsword swings or Estus chugs. It's probably the easiest mistake to make on a first fight, but you're better off removing your lock-on and running away as long as you notice the circles spawning in. If you ever do fail to break his focus, things get a lot more complicated. He seems to take less damage in this form, and the changes to his moveset can be devastating, even against a team that's trying to kill time until the buff wears off rather than continuously dealing damage. His turrets start to rotate, and they have a nasty habit of facing your way the moment he begins a lengthy melee combo. It complicates his dodge timings and makes positioning far more important than for usual bosses in this game. Trying to attack him in this mode is pure folly. 90% of players will just die and burden the team with a revive if they try to go on the offensive here. It's worth mentioning that this will absolutely happen at least once in most fights, purely on account of ultimates not always being charged when he tries to initiate this buff, so you need to have a party that either understands the severity of the threat, or is somehow skilled enough to go toe-to-toe with him even when he's in god mode. It doesn't help that Libra's weakness, madness, is notoriously difficult to have on hand. Unless you get a lucky Madness Tower map spawn or an incredibly fortuitous RNG pull from Libra's strong weapon deal, you're probably not going to be able to exploit this mechanic at all. If you do miraculously get something useful, he's liable to be stunned momentarily and then forced into his easy-to-dodge frenzy state for a while, which is very nifty. Lastly, this might be a strange detail to bring up, but his music is absolutely demented and perfectly captures the feeling of an insane person alternating between rampage and serenity. It reminds me of the Zant boss theme from The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, which you might have caught me using earlier, and it stresses the fuck out of me when I'm close to killing Libra but stuck at low health. I have absolutely jobbed at least once because that track shot my heart rate up and made me jittery in the home stretch. Libra, to me, is the obvious hardest boss because of the mechanical complexity and inaccessibility of his weakness. Going into this fight with a random player who isn't on a voice call with you and able to coordinate behavior is grueling, and results in death extremely frequently. I have seen almost every possible permutation of how this fight can go wrong, from randoms taking horrendous deals before the battle to people getting caught in his arena-wide madness AoE that seems to work sort of like Mog's Nihil attack if you don't stagger him out of it. This fight truly is demonic in every sense of the word. You need multiple galaxies worth of stars to align favorably for good chances of coming out on top here, and for that, Jack and I both consider Libra, Creature of the Night, to be the hardest boss in Elden Ring Nightreign.
Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. Elden Ring Nightreign's bosses were some of the most satisfying and challenging fights ever made in our eyes, and we're excited to hear others' thoughts on their difficulty. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and be sure to stay tuned for the quality ranking coming out soon. That's all for now. Deuces.